This is where my parents live now, Mark suddenly declared upon his visit. Behind him, his in-laws nodded in agreement, their expression smug. I was in the middle of an online meeting. With a sigh, I quickly apologized to my colleagues and ended the call, irritation bubbling beneath my calm exterior. Turning to the doorway, I met their expectant gazes. "Why are you here unannounced?" I asked, keeping my tone measured. Mark's father beamed with pride. "We'll pay off the mortgage, so please vacate the house." For a moment, I thought he was joking. Suppressing a laugh, I studied the three of them. My mother-in-law had never worked a day in her life, and my father-in-law had been jobless for years. Yet, Mark stood firmly by their side, endorsing their absurd demand. Disappointment settled over me like a heavy cloud. Was this really the man I had married? "All right, I'll leave," I said without hesitation, watching their smug confidence flicker into disbelief. "The mortgage is $5,000 a month." With an inward smirk, I turned on my heel and began packing. Seriously. Fortunately, I had a business trip starting the next day, making my departure all the more convenient. With my suitcase and bank book in hand, I strode toward the entrance. "Goodbye," I said, stepping past them without a second glance. The first thing on my agenda? Transferring the house's title to Mark. The thought filled me with exhilaration. "My name is Shelly. I'm 47 years old and a successful web designer. 5 years ago, I went independent, and since then, my earnings have skyrocketed, more than 5 times my previous salary. Now, I live in a luxurious high-rise condo, perched on the top floor with a breathtaking view. I met Mark 3 years ago through Ashley, my former boss and his cousin. He was kind, honest, and, according to Ashley, unlucky in love. He had struggled with relationships and remained single for years. At the time, I wasn't looking for marriage, but Ashley insisted we meet. Mark was attractive, with a gentle demeanor that made it easy to fall for him. Within 6 months, we were engaged. My parents had passed away, leaving me with only my brother and his wife as close family. They attended our family meeting, where Mark's parents and cousin Ashley also gathered. The meeting went smoothly, but my sister-in-law's parting words lingered in my mind. "This all feels a little stiff." I brushed it off then, not realizing how prophetic her words would become. After our wedding, Mark moved into my home, and we started our life together. His job was demanding. He left before dawn and returned past midnight. Despite his grueling hours, his salary was only a fraction of mine. One evening, I gently suggested, "This workload isn't healthy. Have you thought about finding a different job?" His reaction was immediate and explosive. "Are you saying I should quit? Do you look down on me because I earn less?" His anger caught me off guard. We had never fought before, and I hadn't intended to offend him. Taking a deep breath, I softened my approach. "That's not what I meant. I'm just worried about your health." Mark exhaled, his tension fading. "I'm sorry," he murmured, and just like that, our first argument ended. After that, I never brought up the topic again. Instead, I did what I could to make our home a place of rest for him. But soon, his late nights stretched into overnight stays at the office. He seemed to enjoy his work, so I let him be. Then came the financial requests. "Hey, about my dad's medical expenses. Could we increase the remittance a bit?" Mark asked one evening, his tone hesitant. We were at the hospital, visiting his father, who had been admitted for back pain. I sighed internally. Since I had no parents of my own, I didn't mind supporting my in-laws. Our household depended on my income anyway, with Mark sending a portion of his paycheck to them each month. Still, his salary wasn't insubstantial for a man in his 40s, and his parents never seemed to struggle. Despite my reservations, I couldn't refuse with his family watching. "Mark, you're so kind," his mother gushed. "Thank you so much, it's a big help." Under their expectant stares, I reluctantly agreed. That was the beginning. Once they realized I wouldn't outright refuse, their demands grew. At first, they were small requests, then they escalated, always directed at Mark, who struggled to say no, especially to his mother. Each time she asked, he gave in, and I watched as our finances became their safety net. The night his father was discharged, Mark and I returned home, only to find his parents waiting outside. "What's going on?" I asked, dread curling in my stomach. Mark hesitated before speaking. "It's hard for Dad to climb the stairs at their house. I thought they could stay here until he fully recovers." His mother gave me a pointed look, as if daring me to object. His father stood at the doorstep expectantly. "You didn't think to discuss this with me first?" I asked, glancing at Mark. His gaze darted away. confirming my suspicion. This wasn't a last-minute decision, it had been planned behind my back. With a slow inhale, I forced a smile. Fine, you can stay here until he recovers. They shuffled inside, taking in the space with greedy eyes. This place is so nice, Mark's father mused. Our home is over 50 years old, falling apart. Really? Yeah, it's really showing its age, his mother added, her tone wistful. Mark nodded along, and I realized with a sinking feeling that they had no intention of leaving anytime soon. If your house is in bad shape, why not renovate? I suggested. Mark's response was vague. Yeah, maybe. Deep down, I already knew the truth, they weren't planning on going back at all. 2 years into our marriage, what should have been our honeymoon phase, Mark and I were little more than strangers sharing a house. 2 of 2. We hadn't even gone on a honeymoon. This place had always been both my home and office. It was manageable when Mark was away at work, but with his parents around all day, things became complicated. If we had to live together, I would have preferred to move into their house and keep the space solely for work. Fortunately, my initial resistance kept them from officially proposing cohabitation again, but months passed after my father-in-law's hospital discharge, and my mother-in-law showed no signs of taking him back. Their belongings started creeping out of the guest room and spilling into the living room. Mark, your dad seems perfectly fine now. He even went bowling today. Maybe it's time for them to go home, I suggested casually. Mark bristled. What are you saying? Sending my dad back with his bad back is cruel. What if it gets worse? His voice rose, sharp with accusation. I held my tongue. Mark had developed a habit of raising his voice to assert dominance, believing volume equaled authority. Anytime I challenged him, his mother would immediately take his side, leaving me outnumbered. This pattern had persisted for 2 years. During that time, I handled all the housework while my in-laws freely went out to enjoy themselves. My father-in-law's back had long since healed, yet there was no mention of them leaving. One afternoon, as I set lunch on the table, I said, I have a meeting at 1 p.m. So I'll eat in my room. Understood, but leave the dishes for later, my mother-in-law replied absently, not even glancing up. At exactly 1 p.m. My online meeting began. Barely 10 minutes in, the door suddenly burst open. This is where my parents and I live now, Mark announced grandly. Behind him, his parents nodded in agreement. I muted my microphone, closed my laptop, and let out a slow breath. I told you I had a meeting, I said, irritated but composed. I walked to the door and faced them. Why are you doing this all of a sudden? My father-in-law smirked. We'll pay the mortgage, so you can leave. The audacity of it almost made me laugh. My mother-in-law had never worked a day in her life, and my father-in-law had been unemployed for years, and yet, Mark stood there, backing them up as if this was a reasonable proposal. I met their expectant gazes and, without hesitation, said, all right, I'll leave. Their smug expressions faltered. The mortgage is $5,000 a month, I added casually before turning away. Inside, I was already smiling. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I gathered my things with quiet efficiency, treating the decision with the seriousness it deserved. Fortunately, I had a business trip scheduled the next day, which made my departure all the more convenient. With my suitcase packed and bank book in hand, I walked to the entrance. Goodbye, I said, stepping out without a backward glance. The first thing I did was transfer the house title to Mark. Excitement buzzed within me as I checked into a hotel and immediately contacted a real estate agent. The mortgage, along with the house, was now Mark's responsibility. If he couldn't afford it, he had 2 choices: pay it off in a lump sum or sell the house. Meanwhile, I instructed the agent to find me a new home and office. My work was remote, but I needed a dedicated space for client meetings. Within days, I found the perfect place, about 40 minutes from my previous residence. With excellent security and a stunning view, I purchased it without hesitation, considering it a well-earned reward for my years of hard work. While waiting for the paperwork to finalize, I stayed in temporary housing. I hired a moving company to handle the transition, sparing myself the hassle. Mark and his parents were present during the move, muttering petty remarks about me under their breath. At one point, a mover turned to me and whispered, "You have a difficult family." I merely smiled. A week after I settled into my new place, Mark called. His voice was tense. About the mortgage. Can you change it to my name? I could hear his father shouting in the background, urging him to get me to fix the situation. I leaned back in my chair, unfazed. But we're getting a divorce. right? It wouldn't be fair for me to pay the mortgage when you're the ones living there." There was a long silence. But I thought. Mark trailed off. He sounded genuinely confused, as if this had only just dawned on him. I smiled knowingly. "You told me to leave, remember? I recorded the conversation. It happened during my web meeting." Mark's breath hitched. He had forgotten that I always recorded my meetings for documentation purposes. "Anyway," I continued smoothly, "you'll need to start handling the mortgage payments soon. It's subject to a credit check." Mark hesitated. "Wait, how much is the mortgage again?" I laughed. He truly hadn't been paying attention. $5,000 a month, I reminded him. Silence. Then, his mother grabbed the phone, her voice shrill with panic. "You can't seriously expect Mark to pay that. He doesn't make that kind of money." I leaned forward, savoring the moment. "Then I guess you should have thought twice before telling me to leave." The truth comes to light. Mark's mother scoffed at the mortgage amount, convinced that Mark's salary could easily cover it. She had no idea he had never disclosed his actual earnings to them. Confidently, she sneered, "We won't be sending you any more money, so don't expect our help." I couldn't hold back my laughter, which only fueled her irritation. $4,000, I finally said. She blinked. "What? The mortgage? It's $4,000 a month." For a moment, she was stunned, then, she burst into laughter. "That's impossible. Mark has been sending us $4,000 every month. If his salary were only $4,000, that would mean he gave us everything. Stop lying." Still calm, I pointed her toward the proof. "Check the shelf by the entrance. Mark keeps his salary slips there. If you don't believe me, see for yourself." She scoffed, calling me a liar, but curiosity got the better of her. In the background, I could hear Mark fumbling, trying to stop her. Moments later, a sharp gasp rang through the phone. "What? There's not even $4,000 here, Mark. What is this? Explain yourself." It turned out Mark's salary was even lower than I had assumed. His parents, now realizing the truth, began interrogating him. "You might not hear me," I said, raising my voice slightly, "but just so you know, the actual mortgage is $5,000. Take care." Whether they heard me or not, I didn't care. I ended the call. Mark called multiple times afterward, but I ignored every one. Finally, I sent a single text, "Let's discuss this through a lawyer from now on." Then, I blocked his number. The legal battle begins. My lawyer handled the onslaught of messages from Mark and his parents. Within days, their desperate pleas turned into baseless accusations. Then, I received a formal response from their side, and I couldn't help but laugh. "The allegations by Shelly are false, and the real victim is our client. We demand compensation for emotional distress." I stared at the paper, then turned to my lawyer. "I'm sorry, what?" Technically, Mark and I were still legally married, but the divorce was inevitable. The idea that he, the one who had betrayed me, was now playing the victim was laughable. "My client wants to meet and discuss in person," my lawyer said, handing me another letter. "It seems Mark isn't aware of this yet." I agreed. On one condition, we would meet at a location of my choosing, far from my new home. The meeting that changed everything. At the scheduled meeting, Mark was nowhere to be found. Instead, I was greeted by a young, polite lawyer. "Good afternoon," he said professionally. I quickly realized he wasn't representing Mark. He was representing Mark's mother. As we spoke, he explained that Mark had remained silent throughout their discussions, his head down, while his parents insisted I was fabricating claims for financial gain. He handed me a document listing my so-called malicious actions. I skimmed through it and nearly laughed at how absurdly it twisted the truth. Point by point, I refuted every lie with clear evidence. The lawyer nodded thoughtfully. "I see," he murmured, "your statements completely contradict theirs, and you have proof to back them up." At one point, I even corrected an error in their document, something even their side hadn't caught. The lawyer looked genuinely taken aback. By the end of the meeting, he left with a thoughtful expression, while my lawyer and I strategized our next move. The final confrontation. A month later, Mark and his parents arrived at the final meeting looking exhausted and worn. His mother glared at me as if I had personally ruined her life. "You must be enjoying all this," she spat. "Who do you think is responsible for this mess?" I tilted my head. "You, of course." She bristled, clearly expecting a different answer. The meeting was set in an upscale restaurant, one she had once adored. Now, however, she looked irritated by the setting. likely because their own lawyer had abandoned their case. "Mother, didn't you used to love this place?" I asked sweetly. Her glare deepened. For the first time since entering, Mark finally spoke. His voice wavered with desperation. "Shelly, I was wrong. Please help me. I can't go on like this. I'll do anything, please. Just come back." His parents turned to him in shock. I offered him a gentle smile, briefly letting him believe he had a chance, before signaling to my lawyer. A document was placed in front of Mark. Mark hesitated before taking it, his face pale. His mother snatched it from his hands, her eyes scanning the contents. Slowly, her expression twisted with rage. This is a lie," she shrieked, slamming the document onto the table. Her fury boiled over. In one swift motion, she grabbed her glass of water and threw it at me. The cold liquid splashed across my face. For a brief second, the entire room fell silent. Then, I laughed. A full, genuine, amused laugh. Everyone at the table stared at me, stunned. Even my lawyer looked momentarily caught off guard. I wiped my face with a napkin, my laughter subsiding. "Well, I suppose I wasn't the perfect wife," I said lightly. "I shared the burden of household chores, endured criticism for my infertility, and even had my earnings taken from me." Before they could interrupt, I gave my lawyer another signal. He reached into his folder and pulled out a photograph. It was placed on the table. A picture of Mark entering a hotel with a young woman. Mark's face drained of color. His parents fell into stunned silence. The woman? Ashley, Mark's cousin. The woman who had introduced us. Ashley had already confessed everything during the legal proceedings. Faced with undeniable evidence, Mark could do nothing but sit there, frozen. I handed Mark the final documents, the divorce papers and the compensation agreement. "You've already lost, Mark," I said calmly. Within a month, Ashley informed me that Mark and his parents had been forced to move due to financial strain. His salary couldn't sustain their lifestyle, and they were now relying on rental assistance. Ironically, Ashley's parents had to cover compensation payments, not just to me, but to another woman Mark had deceived. As for Ashley, she found unexpected love with Mark's former lawyer. Apparently, she had been drawn to his decisiveness. A new beginning. The entire ordeal inspired me to start a blog, sharing my experiences. Before long, writing opportunities came pouring in. Meanwhile, an executive I had met through business, someone kind, intelligent, and completely unlike Mark, began pursuing me. Our professional exchanges turned personal. Now, he's asked me to move in with him. As I sit in front of my computer, preparing for our date tomorrow, I smile. This time, not out of irony, but out of genuine happiness.